But in Israel, I started off and I got up and I said, I'm going to start this by recognizing that this is the land that Hashem promised to Abraham, and it's the indigenous territory of the Jewish people.
It's beautiful, beautiful.
First, I want to thank...
That's a snippet from a conversation from the first day of Rosh Hashanah, September the 23rd, at Toronto's Beth Sholem Synagogue, where the guest of honor chatting with Rabbi Aaron Flansreich was a man who's been dubbed an Anishinaabe Zionist, or an Indigenous Zionist. He's the Honourable Mr. Justice Harry LaForme, recently retired from Ontario's highest court, the Court of Appeal, where over 20 years ago he became the first Indigenous person in Canada appointed to such an important position. And it was Irwin Cotler who put him there while Cotler was Justice Minister in 2004. Justice LaForme has been spending a lot of time in Jewish spaces since October 7th, honoured for his outspoken stand against antisemitism and his support for Canada's Jewish community and also for Israel, although it's a position that has earned him pushback from some people, including some in the First Nations community who identify with the Palestinians as being oppressed by settler colonialism. But LaForme is not backing down. He speaks out about how he opposes the tactics of some people who've intertwined the Palestinian cause with the struggle of Canada's First Nations to get their land back and control their destiny. Tactics he abhors that have included hatred of Jews, isolation and othering of Jewish students on university campuses, and the hijacking of efforts to get clean drinking water for the remaining 37 First Nations reserves, still without, by people wearing keffiyehs who chant that Jews should go back to Poland, advocate for kicking Jews out of Canada and worse, out of Israel, a land that he believes was promised to Abraham and is the Indigenous homeland of the Jewish people. The recent recognition by Canada of a Palestinian state just one day before the start of the Jewish New Year angers LaForme for many reasons, but mainly because he feels the federal government has been spending so much money and effort and made political statements about a conflict thousands of kilometers away, but hasn't yet done right by Canada's own nearly 2 million Indigenous people.
There's over 100 reserves that are still impacted by not having clean drinking water. I know Niskandiga, for example, there's a community that they have people on their reserve that have grown up and died and never had clean water come out of their taps. This is Canada. Where do I hear the indignation from Carney about that?
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, September the 29th, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Justice Harry LaForme's life journey began 78 years ago in a mud floor house as a member of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation near Caledonia, Ontario. After spending his teen years trying to hide his identity to avoid racist bullying in school, it was coaching his little brother's Indigenous basketball team that turned him into a proud trailblazer for the rights of Canada's Indigenous people. As a lawyer, then a trial judge, then to the appeal court, and along the way enshrining human rights for other minorities, too. He approved same-sex marriage in Ontario and medical marijuana. He sat as the original head of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission when it launched in 2008. And before the late Pope Francis came to Canada in 2023 to apologize for residential schools, LaForme had lobbied the Vatican to walk back its centuries-old doctrine that allowed white Catholics to enslave Canada's First Peoples. Now LaForme works as a senior lawyer at a Toronto law firm that specializes in Indigenous law, where there are also some Jewish colleagues, including the daughter of Canada's outgoing ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Rae. LaForme credits his love for Jewish people to his religious upbringing and many of the close friends he made with Jewish lawyers, especially later on the bench where they bonded over being outsiders. LaForme's advocacy hasn't just been confined to speaking to Jewish groups. He's testified to Parliament about anti-Semitism, and he's written op-eds in national newspapers. All this has earned him gratitude and accolades from many Jewish groups and led him to complete a lifelong desire recently and go to Israel. Justice LaForme joins me now from his home in Ancaster.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, it's good to meet you face to face. We've spoken by phone, but I didn't see, now I can see, but our listeners will notice that you have a yellow hostage pin on one lapel, and the other lapel, of course, is your Order of Canada.
Right.
So maybe you could describe to us how you got the yellow pin and why do you wear it?
Well, I wear it because for the same reason that everybody else does. I want those hostages home yesterday. But the other thing, I don't know where I got it because I've been to so many functions. I think it was at the Spirit of Hope gala last year, but I don't know. I have a couple of them. My wife does the same thing. We also have the dog tags that I like to wear when I go to a Jewish function, or it doesn't have to be Jewish, any function. They're always a conversation piece, and you get to tell a little bit about why you wear them.
You have to wear the Order of Canada pin. It's part of the thing, part of the deal once you get it. I know that. You don't have to wear the hostage dog tags or the yellow ribbon because of the threats that I personally have been exposed to by protesters and others. I don't feel safe wearing my dog tags or my hostage pin or any Israeli pin anymore in public, and I feel badly about that. Do you get any uncomfortable reactions when people see that?
I don't care. I mean, I take the attitude look at. I'm 78 years old. I'll be 79 next month. And I'm sort of like Bruce Springsteen. If you ever see a photo of him and he talks about his age and he doesn't give an F what he says or what people think of it. I'm sort of like that. I figure I've lived long enough that I have a right to my opinion.
Well, it's wonderful to hear this. And I wonder, when you hear Jewish people feeling that they have to hide their identity, it rings a bell for you and your childhood growing up as an Indigenous person. Maybe you would like to explain sort of the parallels of how you felt at one time you needed to blend in or hide.
Oh, I did. We were going to school in Buffalo, New York. That's where my father had to go to get a job.
He was an auto worker, yes?
Yes, he was. So when we went to school, our first experience was really, really extreme racism. They came up to us, the kids came up to us, they took our pencils and our rulers and everything and broke them and said we were, these little savages and Indians. And so it became something that we tried to hide. And if somebody wanted to think I was Italian, I was good with that, or Greek or whatever, Now, I had an experience. When I was 19 years old, my little brother was a basketball player. And he said, because I used to play basketball in school, and he said, we need a coach. Our coach won't do our team. And it was an Indigenous basketball community. So I said I would coach. It literally changed virtually everything in my life. I spent a year with those kids, and I was with a bunch of kids that wore who they were on their sleeve. They were so proud of who they were. They were so proud of their indigeneity. They were so proud of their communities and everything. And that kind of rubs off on you when you're around it and you see these young people with that kind of enthusiasm about who they are, you kind of do it. And then shortly after that, I went to work with my Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians, which was a political movement in the early 70s. And interestingly enough, I worked in a residential school. That was our office. They called it the Mush Hole, but it was the Mohawk Institute in Brantford, Ontario. And it is on Six Nations land. Anyways, it was an Anglican church-run institution, and they had just closed it down as a residential school the year before. And the maintenance people were survivors of residential school, all of them. And one thing I learned from them, because we used to talk about it all the time, the whole experience of residential schools and whatnot. And what I was struck by was how they were not horrified by it or they weren't full of hate over it or anything like that. There'd be humor in their conversations and their storytelling. And it was really something to behold. I mean, but I found out later as I worked through this organization that that's the way Indigenous people deal with trauma. But after a year, I decided I needed to go to law school because I thought all of these things are going to be addressed someday by our courts. And I was right.
You're retired, but 31 years as a judge, 46 years as a lawyer. November 19th, 2004, Irwin Cotler appoints you. The same announcement that they appointed the replacement for Rosalie Abella going to the Supreme Court of Canada. You get appointed. And you've mentioned many times being othered at school helps you find common ground with other minorities who are othered, whether you mentioned it was Greeks or Italians or, of course, the Jewish people that you encountered. When was the first time you remember meeting somebody Jewish growing up?
I met lots of Jewish people throughout my life. That's why I have problems with the whole idea of being an ally to Jewish people and to Israel, or because it just seems so natural. I've got so many friends and so many people that I absolutely love as friends that are Jewish, that I never thought about it that way. I never thought about it as being an ally. I thought about just supporting my friends who I really loved, and I didn't want anybody hurting them. And that was the real reason. And if the Jewish community wants to think of me as an ally, I'm okay with that. They can do that. But that's not what I think of myself. I think of myself as a supporter of my friends and the people that I love.
But it did take you to places you probably never could have imagined, such as being honored last year by the Simon Wiesenthal. You went to Israel in May.
I always wanted to go to Israel, but, there were other things that, kind of took over. I went to New Zealand, for example, in the 80s. I've been to England several times. I really got a love-hate with that place. And then I had this opportunity with Irwin Cotler again. He is a guy that I really, really had a lot of admiration for before the appointment. So it was a pretty big deal. And when he appointed me, he knew that it was going to be the first Indigenous appointment. And I told Irwin, I can't figure out why me. And he said, why not? He says, why you? It's because who better to understand justice and what it is than somebody who has lived their entire life with injustice. And I think about that all the time.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
There was, why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
You mentioned something just a moment ago I want to pick up on. You mentioned you have a love-hate relationship with the UK. So I want to bring up the fact that we're talking just a few days after the UK, Canada, and France and many other nations got together in the United Nations and recognized the State of Palestine. How do you feel about this?
Oh, I'm against it. I'm against it, and I'm almost embarrassed by it. There's a lot of reasons. I'll give you one. I think about how Canada, this prime minister, talk about the Gazans, the Palestinian people and everything like that, and all this indignation over how they're treated and everything. And I think about it and I say, what about us as Indigenous people? Where's your indignation about us and our history? Because from the very beginning, your constitutional provision in your Constitution that says 9124, for example. It says the federal government is responsible for legislating in the matter of Indians and the lands reserved for the Indians. Now, you could have taken that any number of ways to interpret that, but they chose to take it and interpret it as master-servant. And it's still in existence. It was the legality of residential schools, all of it. It's got its basis in every piece of rotten history for Indigenous people in Canada that you can imagine. They don't have any apologies about it. I never hear anything about it other than from a retired Prime Minister, Paul Martin. We still have Section 9124 of the Constitution. We still have the Indian Act. We still have the magic of papal bulls and the doctrine of discovery that gave, it's a figment of their imagination. It's a piece of magic whereby they get to control all of the land that Indigenous people have. And
let me just, for our listeners, we should explain in case they don't remember when the Pope Francis came, and you met in Rome with them, but when the Pope Francis came to Canada and apologized for this doctrine of discovery, which basically came back to like 1492, when white people and Christian people were the only ones that were allowed to colonize land, in a nutshell, yeah?
Yeah.
Back to the parallels of what Canadians and Canadian politicians and other Western politicians are dealing with. Wouldn't it follow logically that if the Palestinians want their land back, their rights, their self-determination, you would sympathize with that? But I see you call the Israelis the Indigenous people. So I'm trying to understand where that position comes from. Maybe you can help me.
The position comes from my reading history. As I said at a conference when I was in Israel, and one of the first things I said was, and I want to acknowledge that we're conducting this meeting on the land that was Hashem promised to Abraham, and it's the indigenous lands of the Jewish people, Israel. So I said that. I got a nice round of applause. That was good. I care very much. That's where that whole thing comes from. And I just read a book where it talked about the history of the Jewish people in the land of the old definition of what that land was, Palestine, which was given the name by the British. That was the British. And I see that if there is anything about Israel that is false, it's that they're colonizers of the old Palestine, or what we call today Israel. They belong there. It's probably, as my wife says, it's probably one of the most amazing examples of decolonization in the world. They've taken it back. They've taken back their original territory. And I agree with her. It is.
When we hear the narratives today, settler colonialism, and they use a lot of, and I'm talking about Canadians, they use a lot of words like from Turtle Island to Palestine. How do you see that layered onto the Palestinian struggle, and are you troubled by it?
Yes, I'm very troubled by it, because we, as Indigenous people of Turtle Island, that's North America, our relationship was of peace and friendship with settlers. We had treaties and whatnot with these settlers, which said, we're going to live here, you're going to live there, you're going to govern your people, we're going to govern ours, we're going to respect each other, and we're going to do this, and we're going to live side by side through this. And that existed for about 500 years until the late 1700s, early 1800s. So whenever anybody asks me what my idea of reconciliation is, then I tell them. And I guess that's why I'm an Indigenous Zionist, an Anishinaabe Zionist, as I was called in the paper. And I'm proud of that, because I think it's right. Because reconciliation to me is going back to those original relationships, which we know can work because ours did for 500 years. But nobody even talks about it. Nobody even thinks about it. An example is Grassy Narrows. You want to talk about, usurping what's indigenous and using it to support some kind of notion of indigeneity down in Palestine. Grassy Narrows has had a problem, like a serious problem, for 50 years. And they're still having it, and they keep promising and promising that they're going to fix this, they're going to fix this. And there's
some mercury in the water for our listeners who are unfamiliar, yeah, and the poisoning of the water, yes. Last year, it was sort of hijacked by pro-Palestinian teachers who forced kids to feel like they were settler colonials, while this was nothing to do with. But on the other hand, as it seems to me that we have issues here in Canada which are very similar. For example, annexation of the West Bank, which the some of the Israeli government political people have said they want to. Which, how do you feel about that policy?
I don't know, but far be it for me to suggest, when you have an enemy right at your doorstep who has got hundreds of miles of tunnels into your territory and has threatened to do nothing but again and again and again kill all Jews and remove Israel as a state, then October 7th, they come along and they carry out the worst atrocity since the Holocaust. And Israel, in defense of themselves, says they have to do it this way. Who the hell am I to suggest to them that I know better how to defend Israel than they do? And I don't try to get into their politics of Israel. They're at war with a terrorist group that wants to annihilate them. And far be it for me to suggest what is the right course of action for them to take. Just like I don't think it's Canada's place to say, you have to defend yourself this way, Israel. They wouldn't listen if somebody told them to do it, and I don't expect Israel to listen to them.
Fair enough. You mentioned antisemitism, so we'll bring it up again, that why it's anathema to you. How does it clash with the teaching, the 7 tenets of your creator, the 7 characteristics?
All of our 7 sacred teachings are all about respect and honor and truth. And what they're talking about, we wouldn't, for example, occupy territory and prohibit a specific group from going there. Like, that's what happened on these campuses. You can describe them any way you want, but I was there. I went to a couple of them, and I know what the circumstances were. They were denying Jews the opportunity to go into classes. They were denying Jews the right to be on that campus. That's anathema to...
Or anyone who was a Zionist, yeah.
Yes. So that's what I say is wrong. It's totally against it. And when I get people coming out and looking at the cameras with a mask on and saying, this is my land, this is my land, I was given to me by the Creator and everything like that, I want to just absolutely scream, because that's not the way we did it. That's not what our 7 sacred teachings are about, and that's not what we did for 500 years.
Mm-hmm. Where would Caledonia or Oka fall into your approval or not approval of techniques and tactics in order to get recognition? Because, to be fair, those are facts. We have to just bring them up.
They didn't kill anybody. They're not denying people the right to go anywhere. They're not denying. They're just saying you're not going to build houses here, or you go to Oka, for example.
Yeah, I covered it. I was there. So was I? Yeah, I was there for CBC, and one person did die. But anyway, that's a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, we don't have to go into this history, because I'm more interested in talking about, how your journey has been, and we're almost out of time. So
I want to say this. I believe in dialogue. I believe in talking about these things, and I believe in finding ways to find a solution to the problems and stuff like that. But every once in a while, when somebody doesn't listen, like Canada, then you have to have an Oka. And Oka, I will say, wasn't just made up. It was because they were trying to take more land than they were entitled to, more Indigenous land, and turn it into a golf course or improve their golf course. It's always about the land and the traditions of Indigenous people on that land. There's a difference, I think. And for me, when that is usurped and people want to rely on that, then they better be right. Please just be right. And if you're going to do it, with Jews and Israel, then be right about your history. And if you're not right, go look it up, please. Educate yourself before you jump in and want to kill everybody. You'd be surprised, I think, of the support that Jewish people have in Canada by the rest of Canadians. I know the acts of anti-Semitism are going up horrifically high, but there is a big segment of Canadians that would support and do support Jewish people. They're too busy with their lives. I know I would say that about Indigenous people too. I don't speak for all Indigenous people in Canada, but I will say this: they're so busy just living their lives week to week that they don't really care about things that happen 16,000 miles, 12,000 miles away, and they don't care. Here's what I say about it. If people really, really understood the history of that region, the Middle East, and how many times the Jewish people for thousands of years have been expelled from that territory that Hashem did give to Abraham and promised him thousands of years ago, then they would know the real history. And if they know the real history, then I think they know the right position. And they just don't want to learn it. They want to learn it from a 30-second soundbite on TikTok. And I can't sit idly by and keep my mouth shut. And I won't. We have an extra bedroom in our house because a Jewish friend of ours' daughter is going to Mohawk College or McMaster. And she said she feels unsafe in certain circumstances or certain times, and she feels unsafe. We put this bedroom together and we said, you tell her that she's got a safe place to go to any time she wants. And we have it.
It makes me sick to hear this, but I can't imagine what goes through your feelings when you did this.
It hurts. I love this family and I love this young lady. And the idea that somebody could make her feel unsafe or a place could make her feel unsafe absolutely is soul-wrenching.
We have shared trauma, Indigenous residential schools, Indigenous hatred, and Jewish Holocaust, second generation, third generation, fourth generation. We have a lot in common, both of our communities.
When I get invited to synagogues to speak, and I have been quite a few, one of the things I like to take it as an opportunity to teach them a little bit about Indigenous history in Canada. And my purpose is to say, I don't expect the experiences are the same. They're not the same. I know that. But they're equally traumatizing and they're equally damaging. I have a love-hate relationship with this country because I think it's a grand country. But I think that its treatment of Indigenous people is painful to me. I can still cry over residential schools. I can still cry over the fact that they took our children away. Our experiences are not the same, but our feelings are. Because I know that at the same time that people really like me and respect me and everything like that, they know I'm not the same as them. Canadians know I'm different. And that aloneness that you talked about is something that I lived with almost all my life. Just going to law school with the first Indigenous students at Osgood. And I was the only judge that sat on a court of appeal for 14 years alone. And the people that I identified with most there, the Jewish colleagues.
And I'll tell our listeners that my grandfather was your situation about 20 years earlier, first Jewish judge 30 years earlier to be appointed to any Supreme Court in Ontario. And wearing on a Torah, not on a Bible. Yeah.
Yeah. And mine was eagle feather. But I did have some people to talk to, my Jewish colleagues. And they were the closest to me that any of my judges ever were, my colleagues. The Jews, people like John Laskin, who I just absolutely love that guy, Michael Moldaver, Steve Borens, Kathy Feldman. They saved me. I'll tell you, they saved me.
Now you're returning the favor.
No, I hope so. It doesn't feel that way. I'm just helping friends.
I want to thank you for sharing your time with the CJN, with our listeners. Here to all of our
Shana Tova.
listeners. Shana Tova, and be well. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Our interview with Justice LaForme was recorded a week before Canadians mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, September 30th, a day to reflect on the tragic legacy of the residential school system. The Court of Appeal, where Justice LaForme sat for 14 years, announced they will not hear any motions or appeals that day, and no counter service will be available either. If you would like to read more about Justice LaForme, go to the links in our show notes. North Star is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. Michael Freeman is the executive producer, and our theme is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.